He almost left before dawn. The truck was already packed. One duffel in the back, another on the passenger seat. His son's sneakers by the door, small and lined up like he'd been told. The house still smelled like fresh paint and old dust. Cedar Haven was quiet at that hour, the kind of quiet that makes a man hear things he's been avoiding. He stood in the kitchen with the job offer folded in his back pocket. Good money. Real money. The kind that fixes things. Through the window, he could see the porch light next door. It was still on. He didn't know why that mattered. His hand stayed on the counter longer than it needed to. He told himself he was just thinking. He knew he was deciding. Cedar Haven hadn't changed. That was the first thing he noticed, and it unsettled him more than if it had. The same wide sky, the same gravel shoulders along Main Street, the hardware store with the crooked sign. Even the gas station still had the old soda machine up front that hummed like it was tired of being alive. He drove through town slowly, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gear shift like he might need it. His son sat beside him, knees pulled up too high for the seat, staring out the window. "Is this it?" the boy asked. Ronan nodded once. Yeah. He didn't trust his voice yet. The house was smaller than he remembered. Or maybe he had grown used to places that weren't meant to last. Rentals, base housing, rooms that didn't ask anything of him. This place did. The porch steps creaked when he climbed them. The sound carried in the still air. He unlocked the door and let it open slow, like something might be waiting on the other side. Dust, old wood, faint smell of someone else's cooking from years ago. His son stepped in first. "Can I have the room in the back?" Ronan glanced down the hallway. 2 bedrooms, one window faced the yard, the other faced the neighbor's house. "Back room's yours." The boy smiled in a quick, careful way, like he didn't want to push his luck. Then he ran down the hall, sneakers squeaking on the hardwood. Ronan stayed in the doorway. He had told himself this was temporary. A reset. 6 months. Maybe a year. Just enough time to get steady work at the mill, save up, move somewhere better. That word again. Better. He stepped inside and shut the door behind him. The sound echoed more than it should have. Unpacking took longer than he expected. Not because there was much to unpack. There wasn't. A few boxes of clothes. A stack of books his son refused to leave behind. A framed photo turned face down in the bottom of one box. He didn't take it out. He set his son's bed up first, tightened the bolts until his knuckles turned pale. Checked them again. "You don't have to do that twice," the boy said from the doorway. "I know." He kept tightening anyway. By late afternoon, the sun hit the living room floor in a long strip of gold. Dust moved through it like slow rain. His son had already claimed a corner for his books, arranging them in uneven stacks. Ronan stepped out onto the porch for air. That's when he noticed her. Next door. She was kneeling in the dirt by the fence line, hands deep in the soil like she trusted it. Dark hair pulled back low, sleeves rolled past her elbows. There was something steady in the way she moved. Not rushed, not distracted. She looked up. Not startled, just aware. Their eyes met across the short stretch of yard. He gave a small nod. Automatic. Polite. She stood, brushing her hands against her jeans. Walked a few steps closer to the fence. "You the one bought the Hale place?" Her voice was level. Not curious, just asking. "Yeah." She studied him a second longer than most people did. Not suspicious, just careful. "Welcome back then." Back. He hadn't said he was from here. "Thanks." There was a pause. Not awkward, just quiet. She glanced toward the open door behind him. "You got a kid?" "Yeah." "How old?" "8." She nodded once, like that information mattered in some way he didn't understand yet. "Well," she said, "if he likes tomatoes, they grow better on this side of the fence. Sun hits longer." He almost smiled. "I'll keep that in mind." She turned back toward her garden, conversation finished. He stood there longer than necessary, watching the way she pressed soil around the plant, like she was protecting something. That night, he lay awake on the mattress on the floor of his own room. He hadn't assembled his bed yet. The house made sounds he didn't recognize. Pipes shifting, wood settling. A distant train somewhere past the tree line. His son's door creaked open down the hall. Soft footsteps. "Dad?" He was already sitting up before the second syllable. "Yeah." The boy stood in the doorway, blanket dragging behind him. "It's too quiet." Ronan held back the first response that came to him. Too quiet was safe. He patted the mattress beside him. "Come here." The boy climbed up without argument, curled into his side. Ronan lay back down, staring at the ceiling. He felt the small weight against his ribs. Warm. Real. "I like it here," the boy whispered after a while. Ronan swallowed. "It's different." "That's okay." He didn't answer that. After his son's breathing evened out, Ronan stayed awake. He had been in places where silence meant something bad was about to happen. Here, it meant nothing. Just night, just air moving through trees. Still, his chest felt tight. He thought about the mill job starting Monday. Thought about the pay. Thought about the numbers he had run in his head a dozen times. Not enough. He turned his head slightly, careful not to wake the boy. Through the thin curtain, he could see the faint glow of the neighbor's porch light. Still on. He told himself it didn't matter. He watched it anyway. Morning came slow. His son woke before him, which rarely happened. The boy was already dressed when Ronan sat up. "Can I ride my bike?" the boy asked. "In the yard." "Okay." Ronan walked him outside and watched while he circled the patchy grass. The bike was too small now. Knees bent too sharp at the top of each pedal. He made a note to adjust the seat. Across the fence, she was already outside again. This time with a watering can. She glanced over. Morning. Morning. Her eyes shifted to the boy wobbling past. He's careful. Ronan followed her gaze. He's had practice. She didn't ask with what. He appreciated that. She stepped closer to the fence again, leaning her forearms on the wood. There was a faint scar along her wrist. Pale. "Old. I'm Serafina," she said. He nodded once. "Ronan." "I know." That caught him off guard. She shrugged slightly. "Small town." Right. He felt exposed in a way he hadn't expected. Like Cedar Haven had been watching him even while he was gone. "Well," she added, straightening up, "if you need tools or anything, I've got a decent shed." He almost refused out of habit. Instead he said, "Appreciate it." She held his gaze a second longer, not pushing. Just there. His son rode past again, this time faster. Laughing. Ronan felt something unfamiliar press against his ribs. It wasn't fear. It was the sense that something here might root if he let it. That thought unsettled him more than any memory ever had. By noon, the kitchen looked like a kitchen again. Not clean, exactly, but used. There were plates in the sink. A loaf of bread on the counter with the plastic twisted wrong. A jar of peanut butter left open because his son always forgot. Ronan didn't correct it. He just screwed the lid back on and moved it closer to the edge where small hands could reach. He stood at the window while the boy ate, watching the street. A pickup drove by slow. Didn't stop, but it slowed anyway. Ronan saw the driver glance at the house, then forward again, like he hadn't been staring. Small town. The boy scraped his spoon against the bowl. "What are we doing today?" he asked. Ronan hesitated. That question had been easier in other places. There had always been an answer. A schedule. A base store. A gym. A mess hall. A mission. Here, the day was wide open. It felt like standing at the edge of something with no map. "We'll go get groceries," he said finally. "Then we'll look at school stuff." The boy nodded, chewing slowly. "Am I gonna have friends?" Ronan didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the street. "You will," he said. "You're good at that." The boy smiled like he didn't fully believe him, but wanted to. Ronan rinsed his plate after he finished. Watched his son carry his bowl to the sink with both hands, careful not to spill. That carefulness wasn't natural. It was learned. It sat in Ronan's throat like something bitter. The grocery store was on the edge of town, half the size of the ones Ronan remembered from bigger places. The automatic doors opened slow, like they were tired. Inside, it smelled like fruit that had been handled too much, and the sharp sting of floor cleaner. His son stayed close to him, almost shoulder to hip. Ronan grabbed a cart and started down the aisles without thinking, moving like he was clearing a building. Eyes scanning, body ready. He hated that about himself. A woman near the produce section looked up and froze for half a second before smiling. Ronan Hale? He recognized her voice before her face. Mrs. Danner, he said. She stepped forward and touched his arm lightly, like she needed to confirm he was real. Her hair was grayer than he remembered. Her eyes still too kind. Oh my God, she murmured. You're home. He nodded. Yeah. And this must be. My son, Ronan said, before she could say a name. The boy looked up at her politely. Hi, Mrs. Perraud. Danner's smile widened, but her eyes shifted toward Ronan again. There was something in her expression that made his skin tighten. Something like pity. Something like relief. Well, she said softly, I'm glad you're here, truly. Ronan's grip tightened on the cart handle. He felt his knuckles press white. Thanks, he said. She leaned closer, lowering her voice. If you need anything, you know where I am. We all heard what happened. Ronan didn't ask what she meant. He didn't correct her. He just nodded once, stiff. Mrs. Mardo. Danner stepped back, as if she'd said too much. Anyway, you take care of that boy. Ronan's son glanced between them, confused. Come on, Ronan said, pushing the cart forward. They walked away, but he could still feel her eyes on his back. His son waited until they reached the cereal aisle before speaking again. What happened? Ronan's throat tightened. Nothing you need to worry about. The boy frowned. But she said. I said it's nothing, Ronan cut in, sharper than he meant. His son went quiet. Stared at the boxes. Ronan stared too, but he wasn't seeing cereal. He was seeing the last place he'd been. The heat. The dust. The sound of someone screaming his name through a radio that kept cutting out. He blinked hard. Pick one, he said, forcing his voice down. His son pointed at the one with the cartoon tiger. Ronan tossed it into the cart like it was just cereal, like it was normal. Outside, the sky had turned pale blue and hard, the kind of sky that made everything feel exposed. They loaded groceries into the truck. Ronan shut the tailgate and stood there, breathing in the cold air. His son climbed into the passenger seat. Ronan was about to walk around to the driver's side when he heard a voice. Ronan! He turned. A man stood near the entrance, hands in his jacket pockets. Tall, broad, face weathered by sun and time. He wore a baseball cap low, but Ronan recognized him anyway. Tucker Vance. They had gone to school together. Not friends, not enemies, just two boys who had grown up in the same dirt. Tucker walked closer, stopping a few feet away. Close enough to talk, not close enough to touch. You look like hell, Tucker said. Ronan's jaw flexed. Good to see you too. Tucker's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then it faded. I heard you were back. Ronan nodded once. Yeah. Tucker glanced toward the truck, toward the boy watching through the windshield, then back. You staying? Ronan didn't like the question. It sounded like a challenge. It sounded like an accusation. For now, he said. Tucker nodded slowly. Town's different. I noticed. Another pause. Tucker's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he was trying to see past Ronan's face and into whatever was underneath it. You working? Mill, Ronan said. Tucker let out a low breath. They'll take anybody with a pulse these days. Ronan didn't respond. Tucker shifted his weight. Look, if you need help with anything, I got a crew. We do fencing, repairs, hauling, whatever. Ronan's first instinct was to refuse again, but his roof needed patching. The fence was half-rotted, and money didn't stretch the way it used to. Maybe, Ronan said. Tucker nodded, satisfied enough. Then his voice lowered. Just don't disappear again. Ronan felt something cold slide through his chest. Tucker didn't wait for an answer. He walked off toward his truck, leaving Ronan standing there with his hands at his sides like he didn't know what to do with them. Ronan stared after him until the man drove away. Then he climbed into his own truck and shut the door hard. His son looked at him carefully. Is he nice? Ronan stared forward. His hands rested on the steering wheel. He's Tucker. That didn't explain anything, but his son nodded like it did. That night, Ronan went into the backyard alone after his son fell asleep. The yard was uneven. Patchy grass, a dead tree near the fence line that should have been cut down years ago. He walked the perimeter slowly, boots crunching lightly over frost. The neighbor's porch light was on again. Serafina's silhouette moved behind her kitchen window. She was washing dishes, sleeves pushed up, hair falling loose around her face. She looked tired. Not the tired of a long day. A different kind, the kind that lived in the shoulders. Ronan leaned his forearms on the fence without thinking. The wood was cold against his skin. He watched her for a moment longer than he should have, then her head turned slightly, as if she felt it. She looked out the window and saw him. She didn't flinch, didn't wave, didn't pretend she hadn't noticed. She just opened her back door and stepped outside. The cold air hit her, and she pulled her cardigan tighter. "You okay?" she asked. Ronan stared at the ground for a second. The dirt was hard, frozen. "Yeah," he said. She waited. That silence was different from other people's silence. It wasn't pressure. It wasn't impatience. It was room. He cleared his throat. "People keep acting like they know things about me." Serafina nodded once. "They do." He looked at her. "You do?" She didn't answer right away. Her eyes stayed on him, calm but not soft. "I know what people say," she said. Ronan's mouth tightened. "And what do they say?" Serafina exhaled slowly, her breath fogging. "They say you came back broken. They say you lost someone. They say you got lucky to be alive." Ronan's hands curled slightly on the fence. "And they say," she continued, "that you're the kind of man who leaves before anyone can leave you." The words hit harder than he expected. He felt his stomach tighten, like he'd been punched quietly. "That's not true," he said, but the way his voice came out didn't sound convincing. Serafina didn't argue. She just tilted her head slightly. "You don't have to explain anything to me," she said. "But Cedar Haven doesn't forget its people, even when its people try to forget it." Ronan swallowed. His throat felt dry. In the distance, a dog barked once, then stopped. He looked at Serafina again. Her face was pale in the porch light. There was a faint bruise-colored shadow under one eye that makeup didn't fully hide. He hadn't noticed it earlier. Or maybe he had, and his mind had filed it away without permission. "You always leave your porch light on?" he asked, changing the subject because he didn't trust himself not to say something worse. Serafina's gaze flicked toward the house. "Yes," she said. "Why?" She hesitated. Just a beat. Then she said, "Because sometimes it helps to know you could walk outside and someone would see you." Ronan didn't move. Something in his chest shifted. Not dramatic, just real. He nodded once, slowly. Serafina stepped back from the fence. "Good night, Ronan." "Good night," he said. She went inside, shutting the door behind her. Ronan stayed where he was. He stared at the empty patch of yard between their houses, the fence line, the quiet. His fingers were numb from the cold, but he didn't pull them away. He stood there until the porch light across the yard turned off. Then he went back inside. He checked on his son first, like he always did. The boy was asleep on his side, mouth slightly open, blanket kicked halfway off. Ronan pulled it up gently and tucked it around him. His son didn't wake. Ronan stayed there in the doorway for a long moment, watching him breathe. Then he went to the kitchen and leaned against the counter. The house was silent again. But it didn't feel empty. Not exactly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded job offer he hadn't thrown away. He laid it flat on the counter and stared at it. His hand hovered over it. He didn't open it. He just stood there, breathing through his nose, jaw clenched, like he was trying not to be pulled apart by two different lives. Outside, Cedar Haven slept like it trusted itself. Ronan wasn't sure he did. Monday came without ceremony. No speeches in his head. No sense of new beginnings. Just the alarm at 5:30 and the weight of a day that didn't care how he felt about it. He moved quietly through the kitchen, making coffee strong enough to sting. The house was colder in the mornings. He hadn't figured out the thermostat yet. His son shuffled in, wearing one sock. "You start today?" the boy asked, rubbing his eyes. "Yeah." The boy nodded like that meant something steady, like work was proof of something solid. Ronan poured cereal, packed a lunch in a metal tin he'd had for years. Turkey, bread, an apple. Practical. The school bus stop was at the end of their street. 3 other kids waited there. 2 boys shoving each other lightly. A girl with headphones in, staring at her phone. Ronan stood beside his son, hands in his jacket pockets. "You'll be fine," he said. His son looked up. "I know." The bus pulled up with a hiss of brakes. The doors folded open. The boy climbed the steps, then turned back at the top. He didn't wave. He just looked. Ronan held his gaze until the doors closed. The bus drove off. Dust lingered. Ronan stood there longer than necessary. He listened to the quiet after it left. It pressed against him in a way noise never did. Across the street, Serafina's front door opened. She stepped out with a travel mug in one hand, keys in the other. Dark coat, hair braided over one shoulder. "You look like you're sending him off to war," she said gently. Ronan didn't smile. "Feels like it." She locked her door, walked down her steps. "He'll make it home," she said. "Kids here mostly fight over who gets the last chocolate milk." "Mostly," Ronan repeated. She paused at the bottom of her walkway, studied him briefly. "You'll make it home too," she added. That landed somewhere he wasn't ready for. He nodded once. "What do you do?" he asked. "Library," she said. "Plibrary," she said. "Part-time. And I run a small online shop. Handmade things." He pictured her in the dirt with her hands steady. It made sense. She started toward her car. "Good luck at the mill, Ronan." He watched her drive away. Then he got into his truck and headed in the opposite direction. The mill smelled like sap and hot metal. The noise hit first. Saw blades whining. Forklifts reversing. Men shouting over machines. It was a different kind of loud than he was used to, but it still made his shoulders tighten. He checked in with the supervisor, a broad man named Ellis, who didn't waste words. "You've worked heavy equipment?" Ellis asked. "Yes. Don't care where. Just don't lose a hand." Ronan nodded. They handed him gloves, a hard hat, and pointed him toward the yard where logs were stacked like fallen towers. The work was physical, direct, measurable. Lift, guide, stack, repeat. Lift, guide, stack, repeat. There was something almost clean about it. No gray areas. No split-second choices that followed him home at night. By mid-morning, sweat had soaked through his shirt despite the cold air. His muscles burned in a way that felt earned. A younger guy named Mason worked beside him. Early 20s. Talked too much. "So you're Hale," Mason said during a brief break. Ronan took a drink from his thermos. "That's what they tell me." Mason grinned. "My uncle said you used to be some kind of hero." Ronan's jaw tightened. "Your uncle talks too much." Mason shrugged. "Guess so." They went back to work. Hero. The words scraped. He focused on the weight of the lobs instead, the grind of machinery, the smell of cut wood. At lunch, he sat alone on an overturned crate near the edge of the yard. He unlatched the metal tin, ate slowly. Across the yard, a group of men laughed about something. One of them glanced at him briefly, then away. He knew that look. Respect mixed with distance. Curiosity mixed with caution. He kept his eyes on his food. Halfway through his apple, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He froze for a fraction of a second before pulling it out. Unknown number. His pulse shifted. He stared at the screen until it stopped ringing. A text followed almost immediately. Offer still stands. Need answer by Friday. No name. No greeting. He didn't need one. The job was in Billings, security contracting. High pay, long hours, travel, temporary. Always temporary. He locked the screen without replying, slid the phone back into his pocket. His appetite was gone. By the time he picked his son up from the bus stop that afternoon, the sky had turned the color of steel. The boy ran toward him, backpack bouncing. "I didn't get lost," he announced. Ronan crouched slightly. "That's a good start." "They have a reading corner with beanbags," the boy continued, "and a kid named Oliver who knows all the Pokemon evolutions." Ronan nodded, listening carefully, memorizing the details the way he once memorized terrain maps. "Did anyone bother you?" he asked. The boy frowned. "No." Ronan held his gaze a second longer, making sure. "Okay." They walked back toward the house together. Serafina was in her yard again, trimming back something with small silver shears. She looked up as they passed. "How was day one?" she asked the boy. "Good," he said. "There's beanbags." She smiled. "That's serious luxury." The boy grinned and went inside without being told. Ronan lingered near the fence. "Mill didn't kill you?" she asked. "Not yet." She studied his face like she was looking for cracks. "You look tired." "I'm fine." She didn't argue, just nodded slowly, as if filing that answer away. After a moment, she said, "I make dinner on Tuesdays. Too much of it. If you and your son want to come over tonight, you're welcome." The offer hung between them. Ronan's instinct was immediate. No. Keep distance. Keep things simple. Don't mix lives. He felt the refusal rise to his mouth. Then he pictured his son at the small kitchen table, eating in silence. He pictured the porch light across the yard. "What time?" he asked instead. Serafina's eyes softened just slightly. 6. He nodded. 6, he repeated. She gave a small smile and went back to trimming. Ronan stood there another moment, feeling something shift again. Not dramatic. Just a small change in weight. Inside, his son was already telling him about Oliver and the beanbags again, voice bright. Ronan listened. And in the back pocket of his jeans, the job offer felt heavier than paper should. At 5:45, Ronan stood in front of the bathroom mirror and didn't recognize what he was doing. He had shaved. Not carefully, but enough to look less like he'd crawled out of the woods. He'd changed his shirt. A clean flannel. Buttons straight. Sleeves down. His son watched from the doorway, toothbrush in his mouth. "You look like you're going somewhere important," the boy said, words muffled. Ronan looked at him through the mirror. "We are." His son spit toothpaste and grinned. "Is she nice?" Ronan paused. He could have answered easily. Could have said yes. Could have said she was just a neighbor. Instead, he said, "She's steady." The boy nodded like that was the best compliment in the world. Serafina's house smelled like rosemary and something warm underneath it. Bread, maybe? Or onions. Ronan noticed it the second she opened the door. She wore a plain sweater and dark jeans. No makeup. Her hair loose, falling around her shoulders in soft waves. She looked different in the warm light, less guarded. "You made it," she said. His son stepped forward before Ronan could speak. "Hi." Serafina smiled at him, real and immediate. "Hi, you must be starving." "I'm always starving," the boy said. Ronan's mouth twitched, but he didn't let it turn into a smile. Serafina stepped aside to let them in. "Shoes off if you want, I don't care. But my floors do." The boy kicked his shoes off immediately, leaving them crooked. Ronan bent and straightened them without thinking. Serafina sawed. Her eyes lingered on his hands. "You don't have to do that," she said quietly. Ronan didn't answer. He just stepped inside. Her house felt lived in. Not staged, not neat in an impressive way, but warm. A throw blanket draped over the couch. A stack of books on the coffee table. A mug ring on a coaster that had clearly given up. There was a faint crack in one corner of the ceiling. Old house problems. The kind you didn't panic about. His son wandered toward the living room, drawn to a shelf filled with board games. "Do you have Monopoly?" he asked. Serafina groaned softly. "Unfortunately." The boy laughed like she'd told a joke meant just for him. Ronan stood in the entryway a moment too long, scanning out of habit. Exits, corners, windows. Serafina didn't comment. She walked toward the kitchen and spoke over her shoulder. "Dinner's almost ready. You can sit wherever." Ronan followed slowly. The kitchen table was small. 4 chairs. One of them had a cushion tied to it with mismatched string. A vase of dried wildflowers sat in the center, slightly crooked. His son sat immediately, drumming his fingers. Serafina set down a bowl of salad, then a plate of bread. "Wash your hands," Ronan told his son. The boy slid off the chair and ran to the sink without complaint. Serafina watched him go. Her expression changed slightly, like she was seeing something she hadn't let herself want. Ronan caught it. He didn't mention it. They ate chicken and roasted potatoes, green beans seasoned with garlic. Simple food, but done with care. The kind of meal someone makes when they expect people to stay long enough to finish it. His son talked the whole time. About school. About beanbags. About Oliver. About how the teacher had a weird laugh. Serafina listened like every detail mattered. Asked questions at the right times. Smiled when he smiled. Ronan mostly stayed quiet, eating slowly, watching. He noticed the way Serafina's hand shook slightly when she reached for the pepper. Almost invisible, but there. He noticed the way she avoided turning her back fully to them for too long. Always angled even when she moved around the kitchen. Small things. Familiar things. At one point, his son asked, "Do you live alone?" Serafina didn't freeze, but Ronan saw her shoulders tighten. "Yes," she said, "just me. Where's your mom and dad?" Serafina smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Not here." His son nodded, accepting that answer easily. Ronan didn't. After dinner, Serafina cleared plates while Ronan insisted on washing. She protested once, then stopped. Like she understood stubbornness. His son sat on the living room floor with a board game spread out, reading cards out loud even though he didn't need to. Serafina stood beside Ronan at the sink. Her voice was low. "He's a good kid." Ronan kept his eyes on the plate in his hands. "Yeah. You did something right." He almost laughed. It would have come out wrong, so he didn't. Serafina dried a fork with a towel. Her hands were careful, precise. "People talk about you," she said. Ronan's jaw tightened. "I know. They shouldn't," she added. "But they do." Ronan set the plate down and reached for another. Water ran over his knuckles. Serafina leaned her hip lightly against the counter. "They don't know you," she said. Ronan glanced at her. "You don't either." She didn't flinch. "No," she admitted. "But I know what it looks like when someone is trying to hold a whole world together with their bare hands." Ronan's throat tightened. He turned back to the sink. "It's not working." Serafina didn't answer right away. Then she said, "It is. You're just too tired to see it." The words sat between them. Quiet. Heavy. Ronan rinsed the last plate and set it on the rack. His hands were shaking slightly now. He hated that she'd noticed him in that way. He hated that part of him liked it. When they finally left, the night air slapped cold against Ronan's face like a wake-up. His son walked beside him with bread wrapped in foil clutched to his chest. Serafina had insisted they take leftovers. At the fence line, Serafina paused. "Good night," she said. His son waved enthusiastically. "Good night," Ronan nodded. "Thank you." Serafina's eyes flicked to him. "You're welcome." She hesitated, then added softly, "If you ever need someone to watch him for an hour, if you get stuck at the mill, I'm home most evenings." Ronan's instinct again. "No, don't accept help. Help becomes expectation. Expectation becomes attachment. Attachment becomes loss." He stared at her for a second, then said, "Okay." It came out rougher than he meant, but it was still yes. Serafina's expression shifted. Relief, maybe. Or something close to it. She nodded and stepped back toward her porch. Ronan watched her until she went inside, Then he turned and walked into his own house with his son. Later, that night, after his son fell asleep with the leftover bread still on the nightstand, Ronan sat at the kitchen table alone. The house was dim except for the small light above the stove. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. He pulled out his phone, stared at it. The screen stayed black. He didn't want to see the message again, but he tapped the button anyway. Offer still stands. Need answer by Friday. He read it 3 times. His mind did what it always did. Started calculating rent, food, repairs, school supplies, doctor visits, gas, clothes his son would outgrow in months. The mill job paid enough to survive, not enough to breathe. The other job. He closed his eyes. He could already feel the distance. The airports, the hotel rooms, the nights away. His son growing up in small increments he'd miss. He pictured his boy at the bus stop, looking back over his shoulder. Ronan opened his eyes again. He looked down at the table. There was a faint stain in the wood, a watermark shaped like a ring. Someone else's life, years ago. Another family's dinners. Another kid doing homework at this same spot. The house had held people before him. It could hold them too, if he let it. Ronan stood and walked to the window. Outside, the neighbor's porch light was on again. Seraphina's silhouette moved behind her curtains, slow and tired. She crossed her living room, paused, then disappeared down a hallway. Ronan watched until the light in her house dimmed. He stayed there anyway. His reflection in the glass looked older than he felt. He rested his palm against the cold window pane. The job offer was still in his pocket, folded like a secret. His phone was still on the table, glowing faintly with that message. He didn't reply. Not yet, but the first time since he'd returned, he felt something that scared him more than leaving. He felt the beginning of wanting to stay. Friday arrived like a deadline you could smell. Ronan woke before the alarm, eyes already open, staring at the dark ceiling. The house was still. His son's breathing down the hall was soft and even. For a few seconds, he didn't remember where he was. Then the cold air hit his lungs and the weight came back. He got up quietly, dressed, and made coffee without turning on the overhead light. The small lamp by the sink was enough. He liked the dimness. It made the kitchen feel less exposed. The phone sat on the table where he'd left it, face down. He didn't touch it. At the mill, the morning went wrong early. A forklift slipped on ice near the loading bay. No one got hurt, but a stack of cut lumber tipped, crashing down with a crack like gunfire. Men swore. Someone shouted. The sound punched through Ronan's chest before his mind caught up. His body moved without permission. He was across the yard in seconds, hands gripping a piece of wood, pulling it away as if someone might be trapped under it. Ellis barked at him. "Hale, it's fine. Back off." Ronan froze mid-motion. He could feel the adrenaline burning through his arms. His heart hammered so hard it made his vision narrow. It took him a moment to let go of the wood. He stepped back slowly, jaw clenched. Ellis walked closer, voice lower now. "You good?" Ronan nodded once. "Yeah." Ellis studied him. Not unkindly, but like he'd seen that look before. "Take 5, Ellis said. Ronan didn't argue. He walked toward the edge of the yard, away from the noise. His boots crunched through thin ice. He sat on an old pallet and stared at his hands. They were shaking. He pressed them together, hard, until the tremor stopped. A few minutes later, Mason came over, carrying his lunch bag. "Man," Mason said, sitting beside him, "you moved like you thought someone was dying." Ronan didn't answer. Mason chewed on that silence. Then he said, quieter, "You ever, get that thing where your head goes somewhere else?" Ronan looked at him. The kid's face was open, unsure, like he was asking a question he didn't have the right to ask. Ronan could have shut it down, could have told him to mind his business. Instead, he said, "Sometimes." Mason nodded slowly, like he'd expected it. "My dad gets it," Mason admitted. "He drinks when it happens." Ronan's throat tightened. He stared at the yard again. Men moving, machines running, life continuing like it had no memory. "I don't drink," Ronan said. Mason gave a small, awkward laugh. Yeah, you look like you'd punch a bottle before you'd open it. Ronan didn't smile. He stood up. Get back to work. Mason stood too. Yeah, sorry. Ronan walked away, but he could still feel the conversation clinging to him. The kid's dad drinks when it happens, as if that was the normal outcome, as if the shaking was inevitable. When he got home that evening, his son was already in the yard with his bike, tires cutting through the thin mud. The boy waved when he saw the truck. Dad, I didn't fall today. Ronan stepped out and nodded. Good. He watched him ride for a moment, chest tight. The boy's laugh was clean. It didn't carry weight. It didn't have the cautious edge Ronan heard in himself. Serafina was on her porch with a box in her arms. She looked up as Ronan shut the truck door. Hey, she called. Hey. She came down the steps carefully, the box pressed against her hip. I got a delivery, she said. Supplies for my shop. But the driver dropped it at your porch by accident. I figured I'd grab it before you wondered why you had a box of candle wax. Ronan glanced toward his porch. Sure enough, a plain brown box sat by the door. He didn't remember seeing it when he drove up, like his brain had skipped over it. He walked over, picked it up. It was heavier than it looked. Thanks, he said. Serafina's eyes flicked to his face. Long day? Ronan hesitated. Then he gave the truth, but only part of it. Yeah. Serafina nodded. You want some tea? I just made some. Ronan almost said no. Then his son's bike hit a rut and wobbled hard. The boy caught himself, but the moment made Ronan's heart jolt. His hands curled. Serafina saw it. He knew she did. Tea sounds fine, he said. Her living room was dim. The curtains were half drawn, shutting out the last of the evening light. A small lamp glowed near the couch. She handed him a mug. Chamomile. Honey. Something floral. Ronan held it between both hands, letting the heat seep into his palms. Serafina sat in a chair across from him, not too close. Rough day at the mill, she asked. Ronan stared into the tea like it might give him an answer. He could still hear the crack of lumber collapsing, still feel the way his body had launched into motion. Something fell, he said. Serafina waited. Ronan's jaw flexed. It sounded like something else. Serafina's gaze softened slightly, but she didn't move. Did you get hurt? She asked. No. Did anyone? No. She nodded once. Then you're allowed to breathe. Ronan let out a slow breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He looked at her. Serafina's hands were folded in her lap. Her fingers were still. Too still. Ronan noticed again the faint shadow near her eye. Not fresh, but not fully gone either. You always sit like you're ready to run, he said before he could stop himself. Serafina's eyes narrowed slightly. Not offended. Just caught. She didn't answer right away. Then she said, You do too. Ronan didn't deny it. The silence between them stretched, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like two people standing on opposite sides of the same river, both recognizing the current. Serafina finally spoke. My ex used to slam doors, she said quietly. Ronan's grip tightened on the mug. She kept her eyes on the carpet as she continued, voice even but controlled. He'd slammed them hard enough to rattle the windows, and after a while, the sound of anything dropping made me flinch. Plates, books, a broom falling over. Ronan swallowed. Serafina looked up at him then, meeting his eyes. I don't flinch anymore, she said. Not most days. But I still hear things before they happen. I still listen for footsteps. Ronan felt his throat tighten. He nodded slowly, not trusting himself to speak. Serafina exhaled and leaned back in her chair like she'd just said too much. Ronan stared down into his tea again. He wanted to say something right. But the words felt clumsy in his mouth. Instead he asked, Why'd you stay? Serafina's expression shifted slightly. She looked almost tired of the question, as if she'd asked herself the same thing too many times. I didn't stay, she said. I left. It just took longer than it should have. Ronan nodded once. He understood that more than he wanted to. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Ronan froze. Seraphina's eyes flicked toward him. He pulled it out slowly. Same unknown number. The screen lit up with a new text. Need confirmation tonight. Contract starts in 2 weeks. His stomach tightened. 2 weeks. 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and he'd be gone again. Airports. Duffels. Strange beds. His son's voice through a phone speaker. The hollow gap of missing days. Seraphina watched him. "What is it?" she asked quietly. Ronan stared at the message until the words blurred. He could have lied. He almost did. But something about the way she sat there, steady and still, made lying feel useless. "A job," he said. Seraphina's face didn't change much, but her eyes did. They sharpened slightly. "Here?" she asked. "No." She waited. Ronan's voice came out low. "Billings, contract work, security." Seraphina didn't ask why. She didn't ask how dangerous. She just nodded slowly, like she was taking in something she'd feared was coming. "That's good money," she said. Ronan didn't answer. Seraphina leaned forward slightly. "Do you want it?" Ronan's throat tightened. He stared at the mug in his hands, the steam rising between his fingers. "I don't know," he said. It was the first honest thing he'd said about it. Seraphina's voice stayed calm. "When do you have to answer?" "Tonight," Ronan said. Seraphina's mouth tightened, almost imperceptibly. "That's fast," she murmured. Ronan nodded. "They don't wait." Seraphina looked past him, toward her window, as if she could see his house through the dark. "What about your son?" she asked. The question hit hard. Ronan's chest tightened. "He'd come with me," he said automatically. Seraphina looked back at him. Would he? Ronan didn't answer. Because he didn't know. And the not knowing felt like failure. He stared at the message again. His thumb hovered over the screen. Seraphina didn't speak now. She just watched him, eyes steady, like she wasn't trying to pull him in either direction. That made it worse, because it meant the choice was fully his. Ronan's hand started shaking again. He set the mug down carefully so it wouldn't rattle. His voice was quiet when he spoke. "I can't keep doing this," he said. Seraphina nodded once. "Then don't." Ronan looked at her sharply, almost angry. Not at her. At how simple she made it sound. "You don't understand," he said. Seraphina's gaze didn't move. "I do," she said softly, just in a different way. Ronan stared at her. The air in the room felt heavier now, like something important had stepped in. Outside, a car passed on the street, headlights sliding across the wall. Ronan's phone buzzed again. One more text. "If you don't answer, I'm giving it to someone else." Ronan stared at the screen. His mouth went dry. Seraphina didn't say a word, and Ronan realized with a cold clarity that he wasn't just deciding about money. He was deciding about what kind of life his son was going to learn was normal. His thumb hovered over the reply field. His heart beat hard against his ribs. And he still didn't type anything. He didn't answer the message in her living room. He stood instead. Too fast. The chair legs scraped lightly against her floor, and the sound made both of them tense before they caught themselves. "I should go," he said. Seraphina nodded. "Okay." She didn't try to stop him. That almost undid him. Outside, the air had dropped colder. The sky was clear and sharp. Stars spread thin over Cedar Haven like something fragile. His son was still riding in the yard, slower now, tired but pretending not to be. 5 more minutes, the boy called when he saw him. 2, Ronan said automatically. The boy groaned but nodded. Ronan stood near the fence, phone still in his hand. The screen had gone dark again. He could feel the decision waiting for him, patient and heavy. Seraphina stepped onto her porch but didn't come down this time. She leaned lightly against the railing, giving him space. He appreciated that more than he could explain. His son's bike wobbled once, then steadied. 2 weeks. He pictured packing again, the duffel, the folded clothes, the way his son would try not to ask too many questions. He had always told himself leaving was necessary, strategic, temporary. but temporary had started to feel permanent. His phone buzzed again, call this time. Unknown number. He stared at it until it almost stopped ringing. Then he answered. Yeah. Static on the line. Then a man's voice. Direct. Impatient. You dragging your feet, Hale? Ronan's eyes stayed on his son. I'm thinking. You've had a week to think. Silence. The man exhaled sharply. This is easy money. 6 months, maybe more. You're good at this. You know you are. Ronan swallowed. He did know. That town's not built for someone like you, the man continued. You'll rot there. Ronan's jaw tightened. Across the yard, his son hopped off the bike and started pushing it toward the porch, shoulders slumped in tired defeat. Serafina watched quietly from her side. You in or not? The man asked. Ronan's heart was pounding, but not from fear, from something else. I've got a kid, Ronan said. A pause. Bring him, the man replied. Plenty of guys do. Ronan pictured hotel hallways, strange cities. The way routine dissolves when you're always moving. He just started school, Ronan said. Another pause. Less patient now. Look, the man said, you don't belong in some mill stacking wood. You know that. Ronan felt the words hit something raw. He had spent years being told he was built for more, for harder things, for violence dressed up as protection. He had believed it. He still did, in ways he hated. Last chance, the man said. Ronan looked up. His son had reached the porch and was sitting on the steps, elbows on knees, watching him. Not smiling. Just watching. Waiting. Serafina's porch light flicked on behind her, soft glow against the dark. Ronan's throat tightened. I'm out, he said. The words surprised even him. There was a beat of silence on the other end. You're what? I'm out, Ronan repeated, steadier this time. A sharp exhale. You'll regret that. Maybe. You don't get another offer. I know. The line went dead. Ronan lowered the phone slowly. His hands weren't shaking this time. They felt still. Across the yard, his son stood up. Dad. Ronan walked toward him, each step deliberate. We staying? The boy asked. Ronan crouched in front of him. Yeah, he said. The boy's face didn't explode with joy. It didn't need to. He just nodded once, like something had settled. Okay, he said. That was all. Ronan pulled him into a brief hug. Tight, fast, before it could turn into something else. Then he stood. Serafina was still on her porch. Their eyes met across the narrow stretch of grass. She didn't smile wide, didn't clap, didn't look relieved in an obvious way. She just nodded, like she'd heard something important without needing the words. Later that night, the house felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just heavier in a new way. Ronan sat at the kitchen table again, phone face down. The job offer text thread still open beneath the dark screen. He picked it up. Deleted the conversation. His thumb hovered for a second before he confirmed it. Then it was gone. The silence that followed felt strange, like waiting for a second shoe to drop. But nothing dropped. The refrigerator hummed. A car drove past outside. The world continued. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. His chest felt tight again, not with panic, with something closer to grief. He had walked away from something he was good at, something that paid well, something that made sense in a language he understood. He had chosen something uncertain instead. The mill, Cedar Haven, school buses, fences that needed repairing, a neighbor who left her porch light on. His throat burned unexpectedly. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes until the sting faded. This was the part no one talked about. Not the bravery, not the sacrifice. The quiet loss of the identity you used to hide inside. He stood abruptly and walked down the hall. His son's door was slightly open. Ronan pushed it gently. The boy was asleep on his back, one arm thrown above his head. His backpack lay on the floor beside the bed, half unzipped, homework peeking out. Ronan stepped inside and sat on the edge of the bed carefully. He listened to the breathing, counted it without meaning to. He thought about 6 months in Billings. He thought about missing this. He exhaled slowly. "I'm here," he muttered under his breath, though the boy couldn't hear him. Maybe he was saying it to himself. The next morning came with frost along the edges of the yard. Ronan stepped outside early before his son woke. Serafina was already in her garden, hands tucked into her sleeves for warmth. She looked up when she heard his boots. "You decided," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah." She waited. "I turned it down." Her shoulders dropped slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Okay," she said. That was all. Ronan studied her face. "You're not going to tell me I did the right thing?" he asked. Serafina shook her head gently. "It wasn't my decision," she said. "It was yours." He nodded. The air between them felt different now. Less tentative, more grounded. "You'll hate me if this doesn't work out," he said, half to himself. Serafina tilted her head. "I won't," she said, "but you might hate yourself if you'd left." The words hit clean. No drama, no pressure, just truth. Ronan looked past her toward the fence line, the thin stretch of land that separated their houses. "I don't know how to stay," he admitted quietly. Serafina stepped closer to the fence. "You don't have to know how," she said. "You just have to do it." He let that sit. His son's bedroom light flicked on inside the house. Ronan glanced toward it. When he looked back at Serafina, she was watching him carefully. "Permanence isn't a trap," she added softly. "It's just staying long enough for something to grow." Ronan felt something shift again. Not dramatic, but real. He nodded once. Then he turned and went inside to make breakfast. For the first time since he'd come back to Cedar Haven, the decision wasn't hanging over him. It was behind him. And ahead of him, stretching uncertain and wide, was something quieter, a life he would have to build without running. He didn't know yet if he was strong enough for that. But he had chosen to try. The roof started leaking 3 weeks after he turned the job down. It wasn't dramatic. No collapse. No storm tearing shingles loose in the night. Just the steady drip into a metal pot he'd placed on the kitchen floor. Drip. Pause. Drip. He stood there at 2 in the morning listening to it. Jaw tight, hands on his hips. The house smelled faintly damp. His son slept through it. Ronan didn't. He climbed into the attic with a flashlight and found the soft spot near the vent. Rot spreading in a slow, patient circle. He could fix it. He just needed materials. Materials needed money. He lay awake until dawn, doing the math again in his head, like numbers might change if he stared at them long enough. They didn't. Tucker showed up that afternoon without warning. Ronan heard the truck first. Heavy tires on gravel. Engine cut short. He stepped outside before the knock came. Tucker stood near the fence, hands tucked into his jacket. "Heard you turned down Billings," Tucker said without greeting. Ronan's eyes narrowed. "You're well informed." "Small town," Tucker repeated. Ronan crossed his arms. "You here to congratulate me or tell me I'm stupid?" Tucker shrugged. "Neither. Alice mentioned your roof at the mill." Ronan stiffened. "He did?" "Said you were asking about overtime." Ronan's jaw flexed. Tucker gestured toward the house. "I got leftover shingles from a job last month. Good ones. Can spare them." Ronan hesitated. Accepting help still felt like weakness in his bones. "I'll pay you," Ronan said. Tucker rolled his eyes. "You can help me pour concrete next week." "That square?" Ronan studied him. There was no pity in Tucker's face, no smirk, just an offer. "Fine," Ronan said. Tucker nodded once. They worked through the afternoon, climbing up and down the ladder, measuring, cutting, hammering. The rhythm of it steadied something in Ronan's chest. Tucker didn't talk much while they worked, just handed tools when needed, adjusted angles, stepped back when Ronan stepped forward. At one point, Tucker said, almost casually, "My brother never came back." Ronan kept hammering. Different unit, Tucker added. But same year. Ronan's hands paused mid-swing. Tucker didn't look at him. He was supposed to come home for Christmas, Tucker said. Mom still sets a place at the table some years. The wind moved across the roof, cold and sharp. Ronan swallowed. I'm sorry, he said. Tucker nodded slightly. Yeah. They worked in silence after that. But it wasn't the same silence as before. When they climbed down at dusk, the leak was sealed. The roof looked whole again. Ronan wiped his hands on his jeans. Thanks, he said. Tucker nodded. Then he added, staying's harder than leaving. Ronan looked at him. Tucker met his eyes steadily. Just don't quit on it when it gets ugly, Tucker said. Then he walked back to his truck and drove off. Ronan stood in the yard, staring up at the patched section of roof. Ugly. He wondered what that would look like. It came sooner than he expected. The call from the school was calm. Too calm. Nothing serious, the secretary said, but we need you to come in. Ronan's pulse spiked anyway. He drove fast but not reckless. In the principal's office, his son sat in a chair too big for him, shoulders tight. Across from him stood another boy, taller, face red. The principal spoke carefully. There was a misunderstanding on the playground. Ronan's son looked up at him. I told them to stop, the boy said quietly. Ronan crouched down in front of him. Stop what? The boy's jaw tightened. He said you were a killer, his son whispered. The words hit like cold water. Ronan felt the air leave his lungs. The other boy shifted uncomfortably. My dad said. That's enough, the principal cut in. Ronan's son's hands were clenched into fists. I pushed him, the boy admitted. He fell. Ronan looked at the scrape on the other boy's elbow. Minor. Already drying. No broken bones. No blood. Still. Ronan stood slowly. He felt every eye in the room on him. I'll handle it, he said quietly. Outside the office, in the hallway that smelled like crayons and disinfectant, his son stared at the floor. Look at me, Ronan said gently. The boy looked up. You don't push, Ronan said. He said, I know what he said. The boy's eyes filled, but he didn't cry. I'm not, the boy said quickly. You're not. Ronan's throat burned. He crouched again, lowering himself to eye level. Listen to me, he said. His voice was steady, but his chest wasn't. People say things when they don't understand them. That doesn't mean you fight them. The boy swallowed hard. But it's not true. Ronan held his gaze. No, he said quietly. It's not. That was the only lie he allowed himself. He stood and walked his son out of the school. In the truck, the boy stared straight ahead. Are we leaving? He asked suddenly. Ronan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. No, he said immediately. The boy nodded, but his shoulders didn't relax. Ronan drove home in silence. He could feel the town pressing in around them now. The looks, the whispers, the pieces of his past slipping into his son's present. Staying wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. It had consequences he hadn't fully counted. When they pulled into the driveway, Serafina was in her yard again. She saw their faces immediately. She didn't ask from a distance. She crossed the grass and met them halfway. What happened? She asked softly. Ronan hesitated. His son spoke first. Someone said Dad's a killer. Serafina didn't flinch. She didn't look shocked. She just looked at Ronan. Not questioning. Waiting. Ronan swallowed. It's complicated, he said. Serafina nodded. Then she crouched in front of his son. People say things when they're scared, she said gently, or when they're trying to feel bigger. The boy stared at her. You're allowed to feel mad, she continued, but you're not allowed to hurt someone because of it. The boy nodded slowly. Serafina reached out and squeezed his shoulder lightly. You want to help me water the tomatoes? She asked. The boy hesitated, then nodded. He followed her toward the garden, leaving Ronan standing alone near the truck. He watched them. The way she handed him the watering can, the way his son listened, something inside Ronan tightened and steadied at the same time. Staying was already costing him. But leaving would have cost something else. He leaned against the truck and closed his eyes for a moment. The town wasn't going to forget who he'd been. He just had to decide if he could live with that, and if his son could. That night, Ronan couldn't eat. He sat at the kitchen table with a plate in front of him, fork untouched, staring at the wall like it might explain something. His son ate quietly. No stories, no jokes, just small bites and long pauses. Halfway through, the boy asked, "Did you kill people?" The fork slipped from Ronan's fingers and hit the plate with a dull clink. He didn't move right away. The question wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was worse than that. It was honest. Ronan's throat tightened so hard it felt like he couldn't breathe properly. He forced himself to pick up the fork again, not because he planned to eat, but because his hands needed something to do. "I was a soldier," he said. His son watched him carefully. "That doesn't answer it," the boy said. Ronan stared down at the plate. Potatoes, green beans, food that should have tasted like normal life. He swallowed. "Yes," he said finally, "I did." The boy's face didn't change much at first, like he didn't understand what he'd just asked for until he got it. Then his eyes flicked away. "Were they bad?" the boy asked. Ronan's grip tightened on the fork. He could have said yes. He could have said they deserved it. He could have made it simple for his son. But he couldn't. "I don't know," Ronan said quietly. The boy went still. Ronan forced himself to look at him. "There were times I thought I was doing the right thing," he said. "And there were times I didn't have time to think at all." His son stared at the table. "Did you like it?" the boy whispered. The question hit Ronan in the chest. His eyes burned, but he didn't let anything spill. "No," he said, sharper than he meant. Then he softened his voice. "No, I didn't." His son nodded slowly. Ronan could see the boy trying to fit that answer into something his 8-year-old mind could hold. The boy pushed his plate away. "I'm not hungry," he said. Ronan didn't tell him to finish his food. He just watched his son walk down the hall and shut his bedroom door quietly. The click of the latch felt louder than it should have. Ronan sat there alone with the untouched plate. His appetite was gone for reasons that had nothing to do with food. He went outside later, after the house had settled into silence. The air was colder than it had been earlier. The sky was clear, but the stars looked distant, like they wanted nothing to do with him. He stood on the porch for a long time. Then he walked down the steps and stopped at the fence line. Serafina's porch light was on. He didn't even think about it anymore. It was just there, steady as breathing. A few minutes later, her door opened. She stepped out like she'd been expecting him, not smiling, not startled. She walked down her steps and came to the fence, keeping the distance between them. "Is he okay?" she asked. Ronan stared at the ground. "No." Serafina nodded once, as if that answer was more useful than a lie. "What did he ask?" she said. Ronan's jaw flexed. His voice came out rough. "He asked if I killed people." Serafina didn't move. She didn't react with horror or pity. She just inhaled slowly. "And what did you tell him?" she asked. Ronan's throat tightened. "The truth." Serafina nodded again. Ronan looked up at her. "He looked at me like I was different." Serafina's voice stayed low. "You are different." That stung. Then she added, "But not in the way he's afraid of." Ronan let out a slow breath. It came out shaky. "I don't know how to fix this," he said. Serafina leaned her arms on the fence. "You don't fix it in one night," she said. "You just keep showing up." Ronan's eyes stayed on her hands, the way her fingers curled slightly around the wood. He noticed the faint line of a scar near her wrist again. He hesitated, then asked, "Did he hit you?" Serafina's posture stiffened. Not dramatically, just enough. Her gaze flicked away toward the dark yard behind her. "Yes," she said simply. Ronan's stomach tightened. Serafina's voice stayed steady, almost flat. "It wasn't always like that," she continued. "At first it was just yelling, then breaking things, then apologizing, then more yelling. Ronan felt his jaw lock. She looked back at him. One day, he grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises, she said. And I remember standing in the bathroom staring at them thinking, this is what my life is now. Ronan's throat burned. And you left, he said. Serafina nodded. It took me longer than I want to admit, she said. But yes. Ronan stared at her, something sharp twisting inside him. You ever want to go back? He asked. Serafina's expression shifted. Her mouth tightened slightly. No, she said. But sometimes, I miss the version of myself who believed love could fix things. Ronan swallowed. He didn't know what to do with that. He didn't know what to say that wouldn't sound like a promise he couldn't keep. Serafina's eyes stayed on him. You're scared your son sees you as dangerous, she said. Ronan nodded once. Serafina's voice softened slightly. Then show him what you do with that danger. Ronan frowned. She continued. Not by pretending it doesn't exist. Not by acting like you're harmless, but by showing him you can carry something heavy and still be gentle. Ronan stared at her. The words hit deeper than he expected. Because he wasn't sure he knew how. He had spent years being trained to react, to eliminate threats, to move first. Gentleness had always been something he saved for later. Later never lasted. Ronan's hands gripped the fence until his knuckles went pale. I don't want him to end up like me, he said. Serafina nodded slowly. Then don't teach him to run, she said. Ronan looked away. In the distance, the sound of a train horn drifted faintly through the night. Low, long, like a warning that had already passed. Serafina's voice came quieter now. Can I tell you something? She asked. Ronan nodded. She hesitated like she hated the words before she even said them. When I first saw you move into that house, she said, I thought you'd be gone within a month. Ronan's chest tightened. I thought you were just another man passing through, she continued. A storm, loud for a while, then gone. Ronan swallowed. And now? He asked. Serafina's eyes stayed on him, steady. Now I think you're trying, she said. Ronan let out a breath. It sounded like relief, but it didn't feel clean. He stared at her face, at the faint shadows under her eyes, the tiredness she carried like a second skin. He wanted to reach across the fence. He didn't. He said, You shouldn't bet on me. Serafina's mouth twitched slightly. Not a smile, something more restrained. I'm not betting, she said. I'm just here. Ronan nodded. The porch light behind her cast a soft glow across the fence, turning the wood pale. He looked at that light. Then he said, quietly, Thank you. Serafina didn't respond right away. Then she said, Go sit outside his door for a while. Ronan looked at her. You don't have to talk, she added. Just let him know you're there. Ronan's throat tightened again. He nodded once. Okay. Serafina stepped back. Good night, Ronan, she said. Good night. She went inside and shut the door. Ronan stayed by the fence a moment longer, staring at the empty yard between their houses. Then he turned and walked back to his own porch. Inside, he didn't go straight to bed. He walked down the hallway and sat on the floor outside his son's room. The door was closed. He leaned his back against the wall. He could hear the faint rustle of sheets on the other side. A small shift. A breath. Ronan stayed there. Minutes passed. Then more. His legs went numb, but he didn't move. At some point, his son's voice came through the door, quiet and uncertain. Dad? Ronan swallowed. Yeah, he said softly. A pause. Then the boy asked, Are you going to leave? Ronan closed his eyes. The question wasn't about Billings anymore. It was about everything. No, Ronan said. His voice was steady this time. I'm not leaving. Silence. Then, from the other side of the door, a small voice. Okay. Ronan sat there until the house went completely still again, until the fear in his chest loosened just enough for him to breathe. He didn't feel redeemed. He didn't feel forgiven, but he felt present. And for Ronan Hale, that was the first real kind of staying he'd ever learned. Winter came down hard that year. Not all at once. It crept in first, frost along the fence, breath hanging in the air longer than it should. Then one morning the ground was white and the world felt smaller. Ronan stood at the kitchen window watching his son pull on boots that were already too tight. "We need new ones," he muttered. His son looked up. "I can still fit." Ronan shook his head. "You're walking like a duck." The boy tried not to smile. Money was tighter than he liked to admit. Overtime at the mill helped, but repairs kept appearing. A pipe in the crawl space froze. The truck needed new brake pads. Groceries cost more every week. He didn't regret turning down billings, but he felt it. Every time he ran numbers late at night. Every time he looked at the thin line in his bank account and imagined what a single emergency could do. Still, mornings had started to feel less sharp. His son laughed more again. That mattered. The first heavy snowfall came on a Saturday. By noon, the yard was buried, the fence nearly swallowed. Ronan shoveled the driveway in steady strokes, breath visible, muscles burning. He didn't mind the physical work. It quieted things. Halfway through, a snowball hit him square in the back. He turned slowly. His son stood near the porch, mitten raised like a weapon, eyes wide with triumph. Ronan stared at him for a beat. Then he bent down, scooped snow into his hands, packed it tight. The boy gasped and ran. Ronan didn't chase fast. He didn't need to. He lobbed the snowball gently. It hit the porch railing instead. His son laughed so hard he nearly fell. Across the fence, Serafina stepped out onto her porch wrapped in a thick coat and scarf. "You're losing, Ronan," she called. He glanced at her. "I'm pacing myself." She rolled her eyes and stepped into the snow. Within seconds, she was hit in the shoulder by a poorly aimed throw from his son. She gasped in mock offense. "Oh, it's like that," she said. Ronan watched her scoop snow with bare hands before she remembered her gloves. She moved slower than his son, but she moved. And she laughed. It wasn't a small laugh. It was full and unguarded and bright against the white yard. Ronan stood there for a second longer than necessary, watching the way her face changed when she forgot to protect it. Something in his chest shifted again. Not sudden, just steady. Later, when his son went inside for hot chocolate, Serafina lingered near the fence. Snow clung to her coat. A few strands of hair had slipped loose around her face. "You look different," she said quietly. Ronan leaned on the shovel. "Different how?" "Less like you're bracing for something." He considered that. "Maybe I'm just tired," he said. She smiled faintly. "Maybe." They stood in silence for a moment, snow falling softer now. Then she said, "The library's hosting a winter dinner next week. Community thing. You and your son should come." Ronan's first instinct was hesitation. Crowds, questions, looks. But he thought about the school hallway, about whispers that would exist whether he faced them or not. "Okay," he said. Serafina's eyebrows lifted slightly. She hadn't expected that to be easy. "Okay," she repeated. "Yeah." She studied him carefully. "You sure?" "No," he admitted. That made her smile wider than before. "Good," she said. "That means it matters." The winter dinner was loud. Too loud. Kids running between tables. Paper snowflakes taped to the walls. The smell of chili and baked bread and coffee. Ronan stood near the back wall at first, shoulders tight. His son had already disappeared toward a group of kids near the dessert table. Serafina moved easily through the room, greeting people, laughing softly at comments he couldn't hear. He watched the way others looked at her. There was respect there. Warmth. When she approached him, she handed him a bowl without asking. "Eat," she said. He took it. A few people nodded at him as they passed. Some looked longer. Tucker clapped him once on the shoulder and kept walking. Mrs. Danner squeezed his arm. No one said killer. No one said hero either. They just included him. It felt strange, almost undeserved. Halfway through the evening, his son tugged on his sleeve. "Dad," the boy said quietly. Ronan bent down. "Oliver asked if you can help coach flag football in spring," his son whispered. Ronan blinked. "Coach?" he repeated. His son nodded, eyes hopeful. "You don't have to," the boy added quickly. Ronan looked around the room. At the kids, at the parents watching them, at Serafina across the way, talking to an older woman but glancing at him in that subtle, checking way she had. He felt the old instinct rise. Don't commit. Don't promise. Don't anchor. Then he looked at his son. Yeah, he said. I can do that. The boy's face lit up in a way that felt almost painful to witness. Really? Yeah. The boy hugged him quickly, then ran off before Ronan could process it. Ronan stood there holding a half-empty bowl of chili, heart beating too hard. He hadn't just agreed to a volunteer role. He'd agreed to be seen. That night after they got home and his son fell asleep mid-sentence talking about football, Ronan stood on the porch. Snow reflected the moonlight, making everything glow faintly blue. Serafina stepped out a few minutes later, like she'd learned the rhythm of him. You survived, she said. Barely. She laughed softly. They stood side by side, not touching. Thank you, Ronan said after a moment. For what? For not letting me hide. Serafina's gaze softened. I didn't do anything, she said. You did, he replied quietly. She didn't argue. The cold air bit at his face, but he barely felt it. I don't know how to say this right, he said. Serafina turned toward him slightly. That's fine, she said. Try anyway. Ronan swallowed. I used to think leaving was the responsible choice, he said slowly. That if I didn't get too attached, I couldn't hurt anyone. Serafina listened without interrupting. But staying, he continued, voice rougher now. Staying means I can't pretend I don't matter. The words hung there. He stared out at the yard instead of at her. I'm scared of that, he admitted. Serafina was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Good. He glanced at her. If you weren't scared, she continued, it wouldn't be real. Ronan let out a breath that fogged in the cold. He looked at her finally. I don't want to leave, he said. It wasn't about Billings anymore. It was about everything. Serafina's eyes held his. You don't have to, she said. The simplicity of it hit harder than any speech could have. Ronan stepped a fraction closer. Not touching, just closer. I don't know what this is, he said quietly. Serafina's mouth curved slightly. It's not a storm, she said. He almost smiled. No, he agreed. Snow fell between them, slow and silent. For the first time in years, Ronan didn't feel like he was bracing for impact. He felt like he was standing still, and that felt more dangerous than anything he'd faced before. But he didn't step back. Spring didn't arrive gently. It came in muddy waves, snow melting into brown water, gravel roads turning soft, the air smelling like wet earth and pine sap. Ronan spent Saturdays at the field behind the school, setting up cones and flags while kids ran wild around him. He wasn't a natural coach. He didn't yell, didn't do speeches, didn't clap his hands and talk about teamwork like it was a miracle. He just showed them how to hold the ball, how to plant their feet, how to breathe before they moved. The kids listened, not because he was charming, because he didn't fake anything. His son stayed close to him during practice at first, like he needed to make sure Ronan was still there. Then, little by little, he drifted away, joined the other boys, forgot to check. Ronan noticed the moment it happened. It should have felt like loss. It felt like relief. One evening after practice, Serafina came to the field. She stood at the edge of the grass, arms folded against the wind, watching the kids scatter toward their parents. Ronan's son ran over to her immediately. Did you see my catch? The boy asked, breathless. Serafina smiled. I did. You looked like you were flying. The boy grinned and ran off again. Ronan walked over, wiping his hands on his jeans. You came, he said. Serafina shrugged. I had time. She watched him for a moment, eyes steady. You're good with them, she said. Ronan shook his head. I don't know what I'm doing. Serafina's mouth tightened slightly like she didn't like that answer. Yes, you do, she said. You're being consistent. That's what they need. Ronan didn't respond. He could feel the words landing in a place he hadn't fully opened yet. They walked back toward the parking lot together. The sun was low, turning the puddles gold. Serafina stopped near his truck. "You want to come over for dinner tonight?" she asked. "I'm making stew." Ronan nodded. "Yeah." No hesitation this time. That surprised him. Serafina seemed to notice. She didn't smile about it. She just looked at him like she was memorizing the moment. After dinner, his son fell asleep on Serafina's couch with a book open on his chest. Ronan stood in the kitchen rinsing dishes. Serafina dried them without speaking much. The quiet between them was familiar now, not heavy, not strained, just there. When the last dish was put away, Serafina leaned against the counter and looked at him. "You ever think about leaving again?" she asked. Ronan didn't answer right away. He stared at the sink, hands still wet. "Yes," he admitted. Serafina's eyes didn't change. Ronan kept going, voice low. "Not because I want to go," he said, "but because my brain still thinks it's safer to have an exit." Serafina nodded slowly. "I still keep my keys in my pocket inside the house," she said quietly. Ronan looked at her. She held his gaze. "I don't even notice I'm doing it half the time," she added, "but they're always there." Ronan's throat tightened. He reached into his pocket without thinking. His own keys were there too. They both noticed at the same time. Neither of them laughed. Serafina looked away first, as if she didn't want him to see too much on her face. Ronan stepped closer. Not fast, careful. "Do you ever feel like you're waiting for the moment it all breaks?" he asked. Serafina nodded once. "Yes," she said. Ronan exhaled. "I don't want to break you," he said. Serafina's eyes lifted. "You won't," she replied. Ronan shook his head slightly. "You don't know that." Serafina walked toward him, stopping close enough that the space between them felt thin. "I do," she said, "because you're the kind of man who's afraid of it." Ronan stared at her. He could feel his pulse in his throat. Serafina's voice softened. "You're not your worst day," she said, "and you're not what people whisper." Ronan swallowed hard. He didn't trust his hands. Didn't trust his voice. He only knew he couldn't stand there forever. So he did the simplest thing. He reached out and touched her wrist. Lightly. Barely there. Serafina didn't pull away. Her breath caught, but she stayed. Ronan's fingers rested against the scar he'd seen so many times. His thumb moved once. Gentle. Serafina closed her eyes briefly. Ronan leaned forward, not rushing, giving her time to move away if she wanted. She didn't. When he kissed her, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't hungry. It felt like something careful being placed down after being carried too long. Serafina's hand rose slowly and rested against his chest, as if she needed to feel his heartbeat to believe it. When they pulled apart, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Ronan stood there, forehead nearly touching hers, breathing the same air. For a moment, the world was quiet enough that he could hear his son's soft snore from the living room. Serafina opened her eyes. "You're shaking," she whispered. Ronan exhaled a small, humorless laugh. "Yeah," he admitted. Serafina's fingers tightened lightly on his shirt. "Stay anyway," she said. Ronan nodded once. "I am," he said. The proposal wasn't planned. That was the truth of it. He didn't buy a ring right away, didn't hide one in a drawer, didn't ask anyone's permission. He just reached a point where the idea of not doing it felt wrong. It happened in late summer. The air was warm but beginning to thin out at night. The grass was dry. Crickets loud. His son was in the yard building something out of sticks and twine, serious about it like it mattered. Serafina sat on the porch steps with a glass of iced tea. Ronan came out of his house holding a small paper bag from the jeweler in town. The bag felt too light for what it meant. He stood at the bottom of the steps for a moment, watching her. She looked up. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "What is that?" she asked. Ronan's throat went tight. He hadn't rehearsed anything. The words weren't lined up in his head. He walked up one step, then another. Then he sat beside her. He held the bag between his hands. Serafina stared at it like it might bite. "I'm not good at this," Ronan said. Serafina's voice was careful. "At what?" Ronan looked at her. Really looked. Her face in the porch light. The small scar on her wrist. The way she held herself now. Less guarded than before, but still aware. He could see the strength she'd built out of pain. And he could see the quiet loneliness she still carried, even when she was smiling. Ronan swallowed. I don't know how to be normal, he said. Serafina's gaze softened. Ronan continued, voice rough. But I know I don't want to wake up in any house where you're not there. Serafina didn't speak. Her eyes glistened slightly, but she didn't let anything fall. Ronan pulled the ring box out of the bag and held it in his palm. He didn't get down on one knee. It felt too performative, too much like pretending. He just turned toward her and opened the box. The ring was simple, a small stone, nothing flashy, but it was real. His hand shook so badly the box rattled. Serafina stared at it. Then she stared at him. Ronan's voice dropped. I'm asking you to stay, he said. Not because I need saving, but because I want a home, and I want it with you. Serafina's breath trembled. For a long moment she didn't answer. Ronan felt his chest tighten with the old fear. Not rejection. Something worse. The fear that he'd asked for something he didn't deserve. Then Serafina reached out with both hands and covered his shaking hand with hers. Her fingers were warm. She nodded once. Yes, she said. It was quiet, almost swallowed by the night. But it was yes. Ronan's eyes burned. He blinked hard, looking away quickly like that would stop it. Serafina leaned in and pressed her forehead against his shoulder. He felt her breathing change, not sobbing. Just a crack in the restraint. Ronan wrapped his arm around her slowly, holding her like he was afraid of squeezing too hard. His son looked up from the yard. Are you guys okay? The boy called. Serafina lifted her head, wiping her face quickly. We're okay, she called back. Ronan cleared his throat. Hey, he said to his son. The boy jogged over, suspicious. What? Ronan looked at Serafina, then at his son. He didn't know how to say it in a way that wouldn't sound strange. So he said it plainly. She's going to be part of our family. His son blinked, then his face broke into a grin so fast it startled Ronan. Like, for real? The boy asked. Serafina laughed softly, tears still on her cheeks. For real, she said. The boy launched himself at her, hugging her around the shoulders. Serafina hugged him back tightly, eyes closed. Ronan watched them. His throat felt tight again. But this time it wasn't panic. It was the weight of something good that still felt unfamiliar. They got married in Cedar Haven. Not in a church. Not in some big venue. In the backyard, under a simple wooden arch, Tucker helped build. Mrs. Danner brought flowers. The kids from flag football ran around in their good clothes, dirtying them immediately. Ronan wore a plain suit that didn't fit perfectly. He didn't care. Serafina wore a simple dress, hair pinned back with a small clip that caught the sunlight. When she walked toward him, he felt the world narrow down to just her. No noise, no past. Just the fact that she was walking toward him willingly. His son stood beside him as best man, fidgeting with the tie Ronan had taught him to knot. When the vows came, Ronan didn't write poetry. He didn't promise forever like it was easy. He just held Serafina's hands and said, voice low and steady, I'm not leaving. Serafina's eyes filled. She nodded and whispered, neither am I. When they kissed, people clapped. Someone whistled. The kids cheered. Ronan heard it all like it was happening far away. All he could feel was Serafina's hands on his shoulders, steadying him, anchoring him. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, Ronan stood in the yard alone. The grass was trampled, folding chairs stacked, strings of lights still hanging, glowing softly. His son slept inside Serafina's house, his wife's house now with frosting on his cheek from cake he'd refused to wash off. Ronan stared at the lights for a long time. He could still feel the old instinct inside him. The part that waited for loss. The part that assumed peace was temporary. He heard the back door open. Serafina stepped out barefoot, wrapped in a blanket. She came to stand beside him. You look like you're about to disappear, she said softly. Ronan exhaled. Old habit, he admitted. Serafina leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. The contact was small, but it grounded him. Ronan stared at the yard, at the fence line, at the house that now held their lives. "I thought staying would make me weaker," he said. Serafina's voice was quiet. "And?" Ronan swallowed. "It made me scared," he said. "Every day." Serafina nodded once. "Good." Ronan glanced at her. She smiled faintly. "Fear means you care," she said. "That's not weakness." Ronan looked back at the lights. His chest felt heavy, not with dread, with responsibility, with love, with the simple fact that there were people inside that house who would notice if he didn't come to bed. He reached for Serafina's hand, her fingers laced into his immediately. No hesitation. Ronan stood there another moment, breathing in the night air. Then he turned toward the door, toward warmth, toward a life that wasn't temporary. And for the first time, the thought of being needed didn't feel like a trap. It felt like home.